Welcome back to another episode of the Genero podcast. Today I'm joined by Robin Bade, who's a serial entrepreneur and now working as the CEO and co-founder of eBrands, kind of a holding company where you raised $50 million to acquire and operate sustainable and purpose-driven online brands, now with a portfolio of just over 20 brands. So, Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How did eBrands came to be? What was the idea?
Well, originally we were about to move back from the UK. I lived there about 10 years, and then we were thinking of like how to somehow capture the global market and the international market that I had been working with for the last like 10 years. And ultimately, we sort of stumbled upon this idea of what if we would be sort of marketing our own brands versus other people's brands, and then we found a place where you could actually buy these online businesses, and particularly like online Amazon-driven businesses. And I pushed the buy it now button, and ultimately that's sort of how the first brand came to be.
Okay, and when did you acquire the first brand?
That was very early 2020.
Okay. So that was just before, kind of, was it beginning of, before everything?
Well, that was like when I ended up sort of selling my old company in 2019 and played PlayStation with my son for like half a year, and then sort of felt like now it's sort of time to do something new again. And we were just about to move then back to Helsinki in 2020, and the whole COVID thing happened, and everybody worked from home and so forth. So it felt natural to run an online business.
Yeah, and so you have because you have quite a large portfolio, so you kind of have access to this broad view of what's happening, and that's what we want to talk about. So first, I think you mentioned to me offline that like 80% of revenue or something for your brands is in the United States. The rest Europe.
I think 85% of the business is a US-based business. I mean, effectively, the US consumer is our sort of a customer, but more and more, like the brands we've acquired, we bring them over to Europe as well. So I think we have a fairly good understanding of like what's the difference between the European and the US consumer.
Yeah,
very different in terms of like what they buy and how they buy, but ultimately, I think it's been an interesting sort of to see how that sort of product consumption works, and how these marketplaces play a role. How do people buy direct to consumer, and so forth, and what type of products sell on these global marketplaces versus like the direct to consumer. So,
would you say it's easier for a European brand to go to the US or vice versa?
I think it's probably as easy, but I think there's a mental blocker which is a lot bigger
for Europeans.
For Europeans, so when you're a Finn or from the Nordics, the first market you start thinking about when you have sort of thoughts about going international, it's like, hey, how do we go to Germany? That's the first thing everybody thinks about. The fact is that expanding to Germany is much more difficult than going to the US directly.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because you need all the tax numbers, everything even if you sell €1 worth of stuff in Germany, you need all of the sort of VAT tax structures and everything. When we talk about physical product that is actually warehoused in Germany. But if you go to the US, you don't need any of that. You can actually operate with just applying for a sort of tax number, which takes a day. Only once you sort of go above certain sort of sales thresholds, you need to start thinking about local taxation.
Okay. So
otherwise, the marketplaces take care of all the taxes. If you go direct to consumers, so you sell through like a Shopify channel or something, then you do need to cover some of the taxes for sure.
Okay. So, but do you think that there's an overlooked opportunity for Nordic brands? The US is an overlooked opportunity. They're just thinking Germany and these European markets, and they could actually more easily grow and perhaps more profitably in the US.
100%.
Okay, that's interesting. And do you think is there a demand in the US for the kinds of products and companies that we create, for instance, in the Nordics with?
Yeah, I mean,
And the brands will be great.
there's a lot of like great innovation that comes out of the Nordics, and a lot of like quality products. I think we've been quite poor at commercializing some of those products. Then also, I think some of these products are just priced at sort of a certain price point, which maybe isn't sort of done for the U.S. consumer. But nevertheless, I mean, there's a big market there, and there are sort of room for all the products we have here.
Yeah,
for sure.
And would you say, you mentioned differences in consumer behavior? Would you say that purchasing power in the U.S., especially now, is stronger than Europe? So for companies who are thinking about growth in 2023, maybe they're European, should they be thinking about the U.S. as like, maybe it's just easier to grow there, especially now because of consumer behavior?
Yeah, I mean, the consumer is a lot stronger in the U.S. than what we see here in Europe. I mean, I think we've been steadily growing in the U.S., even though we've hit this sort of recession period here the last year. The U.S. brands we have been very well growing. I think the U.K. has been probably the most difficult market. I mean, like Long Johns were the most sold item on Amazon, for example, before the winter, because everybody was sort of worried about the and like socks and stuff like that. Like that's been the most selling items on Amazon in Germany. But so a lot of the consumption here has gone towards like saving like our well-being and all of that. In the US, like that risk the consumer hasn't felt that risk, so it's been quite sort of normal there. But for sure, you can see that people buy cheaper items than what they used to. So clearly, like maybe the top brands that are maybe seen as overpriced or premium priced, the consumer has moved towards maybe a slightly medium sort of priced products, and more, I think, value driven has been the theme.
Okay, so if you're selling in any category, you're selling you're at the premium end of the price point, then you're going to feel that pressure.
Well, particularly if you don't have a real unique selling point, then you just try to sort of capture a higher margin. I mean, for sure, there's been pressure on that. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the trends of what products are trending kind of in Europe, and that's obviously, as you said, because of the perceived risk.
Yeah.
But that's hopefully temporary. Is there any long-term trends in terms of what kind of products or what types of categories people are buying from? Like when you think about from multi-year perspective.
We've been, as I said, we bought like 25 brands or so. We merged some of those brands together, so we're trying to run sort of a leaner brand portfolio in that sense. We have about 350 products or so. It's obviously been very interesting, like the whole shift during the last 2 years. I mean, we started the business when there hasn't been a day of like normal supply chain during these last 2.5 years. But you can see obviously that there were these like COVID spiked businesses that clearly took a boost, and then they sort of fell flat. I mean, we've ended up buying one of those types of businesses that clearly was like a work from home type of trend product. It's been a bit of a challenge for us. But then on the other hand, we bought products as well that related to like traveling and such, which then taken off very well. And there's other things like people have been a lot more aware of like their home and backyards and stuff, like, so a lot of people have traveled less, and therefore they've sort of been more engaged in their sort of local environment and tried to build stuff and I mean, I feel it myself, like it's like travel. I used to travel probably every week, which back in the days, mainly due to work, but now I'm just trying to sit tight and be more productive by being at the place.
You mentioned marketplaces and Amazon specifically, and that's if I understand, that's a big driver. That's a big driver of your revenue for your brands.
Yeah, we sell about 70% of our products through Amazon at the moment.
And that's quite unknown territory for a lot of, from a Nordic perspective, because Amazon is now in Sweden. Maybe they're going to launch in Finland. Do you know when?
No. I mean, if we sell products worth about 2 million per month, there's maybe 6,000 of that is through the Swedish marketplace.
Okay, so
it's tiny, you know.
Yeah,
it's great that they launched. It's going to be like a growing, maturing platform for sure. The more they invest in sort of local fulfillment and that type of stuff and quick, fulfillment. In the UK, I bought stuff usually as a consumer like 9 in the evening, just before you go to bed, and next morning at 7 a.m. somebody's knocking on your door delivering the item. Like, that's the world you want to live in. And that's how the US consumer sort of perceives Amazon, and that's why they buy from there. Okay.
So in a Nordic context, it's still very small. It's going to grow, but it's very, very small.
Yeah, but the fulfillment piece is a big part of it. Like, if we don't solve that, then I think we've done great. There's like stuff like Bolt and other type of delivery businesses that have been cracking part of this sort of fulfillment challenge, and I'm sure as a result of those guys have sort of shown the market that like quicker fulfillment is doable, then I'm sure we'll follow soon.
Yeah. So when it comes to Amazon, I feel like it's maybe a bit, or at least perceived as a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, you have access to this huge, now in the US, a lot of consumers, right? And they love shopping on Amazon.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're putting kind of all your eggs in the Amazon basket. How do you think about building, or for a company that's a Nordic company that wants maybe to expand to the US and looks at Amazon as a really big opportunity, how should they weigh the potential versus the risk?
Yeah, I mean, I view it more as like an entry point in some regards. I mean, we're not selling all of our products on Amazon either, so you might want to look at a strategy where maybe part of your products is sold through Amazon. It's a great way of sort of getting the consumer to try out your product and create reviews, etc. I mean, if you look at some of the retailers in the US as well, like if your product aren't on Amazon and you don't have like 4.5 star reviews, then they won't, house your product on their retail chain. So it's almost this sort of hygiene thing that like if you haven't proven yourself in that channel or in Walmart.com for that matter, then they're not going to sort of source your product. Okay, so it's both like from a purely sales perspective important, but also just from how it creates opportunities for other channels, for sure.
Okay, you talked about brands. I think that, or I assume that branding is a big part of what you do at eBrands. It's not just a product, but it's creating a brand around it.
Yeah, and I mean, Amazon isn't really known for like a brand creation platform, but we've seen that more of an opportunity. So what we've done is like we've acquired these sort of product-driven businesses, and then we tried to sort of amplify them by creating this sort of branded layer on top. Yeah. And then we take them off the Amazon sort of pure play Amazon journey, and then bring them to other channels as well. So
both like retail as well as DTC.
Yeah. We have a B2B team, we have a direct to consumer team, we have an other marketplace team. Yeah. So bringing them on to places like Target.com or Walmart or any of the European platforms for that matter.
Do you think that is the playbook in 2023 and beyond? Like, you need to think of it that way. You can't afford to say, we're not going to go on Amazon, we're not going to do these other platforms, we want just pure DTC because we want the best margins. Is that a mistake?
Well, I mean, I think for some luxury products, that may work. But we don't play in the like luxury exclusive white glove type of categories. We play in the premium categories or like the supermarket premium categories. That's where our products and brands fit in. And for those types of brands, definitely I think an omni-channel strategy is the only option you have. And then you need to weigh like what parts of that product or brand portfolio or like product portfolio inside the brand, what products play in what channel, and how do they complete each other? Because Amazon may be a nice entry for the cheaper end of that brand's product portfolio, but then depending on that brand, the consumer may be going up the ladder in terms of the value, and that may happen through another channel.
Okay, what have you seen when it comes to branding? Because you have this pretty broad portfolio, and as you mentioned, some of the products are clearly impacted by changes in demand, like the work from home trend, etc. But what have you seen in terms of when it comes to building a brand? What are the key elements that are required to make a brand successful in this like very competitive, like let's say Amazon Marketplace? It's very competitive. There's tons of products. What are the key elements to be able to stand out and create a brand that actually has some brand equity?
Well, I think first of all, it takes time. Like we've taken the approach of like acquiring businesses, and it's sort of fortunate in the sense that, well, we can capture part of that value once they've already created a platform. So that's a strategy we've taken, but it can take easily 3 years for some of those entrepreneurs to sort of get to that critical tipping point where it makes sense for us to enter. But at the same time, they need a lot more working capital, a lot more, like most of the brands we bought are brands of like 2-3 million in size, in terms of revenue. And then they need a team to run it moving forward. And at that point, it just makes more sense for them to sell it, because otherwise hiring the whole team just becomes too expensive for that one single brand. For us as a portfolio, it does make sense, So that's the rationale behind like our model. But it takes 3 years easily to build, on Amazon a brand. You do need the reviews. Like some of our products have like 30,000 reviews and 4.8 star like averages. So like that's really what you need. It's like Uber. Uber gives a star rating to you as the consumer, but you give a star rating to the driver as well. Amazon is very much the same.
Okay, so there's a critical mass you need to hit in terms of reviews, for instance, and then kind of it takes off.
Well, and then you do need to be able to crack, the advertising code as well. So Amazon is a search algorithm. More than 50% of the product searches in the US starts from Amazon.com and not from Google.com. So once you write in, beard scissors or hair scissors into Amazon.com, like you want to make sure that your scissors are there.
Just out of curiosity, how big of a difference is it if you get the Amazon's choice or choice whatever it is?
Choice badges.
From like how big of a difference is that on like?
Well, the best seller badge is like by far like that's the crown jewel you want to get. So it's like in all of the Amazon categories, it's like subcategories and different categories. They service this sort of bestseller badge. And I mean, the reality is that that badge is what then the algorithm prefers. But you don't get that badge unless you have a certain amount of critical reviews. You do have a sales velocity of some sort. And then there's a lot in the back end as well. You need to make sure that like your customer sort of SLAs are done. So like your customer service team like is swift on responding to customer requests and questions, because Amazon doesn't do that for you. You need to, as the seller, you need to be doing that. So they score you, like every seller, they score you in the back end. It's called like the EP score. So Amazon gives you a score on how good of a seller you are. The consumer gives you a score of how good of a product you are.
So I guess it's crucial to know kind of the formula, the variables, and how
you need to know all those.
And you mentioned the customer acquisition advertising part. So if we get into that a little bit, what has changed or we're recording this in February 2023. So what do you think are the acquisition channels that are going to be the most important for this year?
Well, I mean, I can speak on behalf of, like physical goods, right? And particularly products that you can ship. sort of fairly easily. They may be bulky, big TVs, or a bed or something, or then like a sock, which doesn't weigh too much. So it does depend a lot on the product, because you may have a euro or a dollar based amount in terms of the margin, which allows you to do various different types of advertising, like tips and tricks. But if you sell a sock which is a worth of $5, then your advertising cost per click can't be $1, because it just is. I mean, it eats all the margin after Amazon takes their fair share.
Would you then say that there's a minimum amount that, like, if let's say there's a brand who's got a product that's great, but they sell it for 40, average order value is like 40 euros.
Yeah.
Would you say that's too low to be able to do any paid
I think it's more like $20 is probably the average order value of a brand. That, I mean, if you go below $10 or 12, we've set the sort of target at below $12. We tend to try to keep ourselves away from products that cost less than $12.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that opportunity to use advertising as a fast forward track. And then there's other things as well, like if you have a brand in the US, I mean, Amazon.com is the main channel of Amazon, so expanding from the US to Europe is easier than going from Europe to the US. So there's a lot of other things as well that does play a role there, but yeah, I think, I mean, advertising is something you do need to crack.
Yeah. And are you mainly focused on just like the bottom of funnel, just direct response driving purchases, or are you also thinking using advertising for more long-term brand building for your brands?
We are. I mean, we do a lot of brand building, but that Amazon isn't like the best channel for that, So like we spend a lot of money on like social channels and partially Google as well, and then we do make a lot of other like efforts related to like partnerships and even like sponsorships and things like that, and that's more like awareness building and credibility for those brands, and we do that obviously as the brand and not as eBrands at all. And that's part of the marketing mix for any of our brands. But then the performance sort of marketing that happens inside Amazon is obviously crucial when we try to sell through that channel. If we prefer to sell through other people's channels, meaning other online retailers, then we do a lot of other type of advertising. So it depends very much on like the market as well as like the sales channels that we support.
Yeah, and the performance marketing piece that's quite easy to justify for a brand, because you can see we put in 500, we get 1,500 back. But
yeah, I mean, if I look at the sort of average return throughout our whole portfolio, if you go back in time, like last year, like every dollar spent on Amazon paid $4.25 back.
Okay.
Obviously, then you need to make a margin as well. So if your margin isn't, plus 20% after all the Amazon costs, then you're actually paying for getting that sale. If you look at Google, the Google performance is on average in terms of in products right now, we landed something for every euro spent or dollar spent, we maybe get 2/3 euros or dollars back. You need to make sure that margin then sort of justifies those types of performances.
Yeah. Is that Google ads driving to the Amazon store?
No. Well, you can do that, but actually we tend to, like, if we spend on Google, we tend to move that
DTC
to a D2C channel.
With better margins.
Our own .com channels.
Yeah. And how do you
But there's a trick as well to run people into Amazon and so forth. But
so you need to have that piece kind of nailed down. You need to understand the margins and the performance in the different channels. But then when you have partnerships, any kind of brand awareness campaigns, how do you think about measuring that? What metrics do you use? Because I feel like that could be quite difficult for some of the brands that are doing maybe 3 million. And if someone tells them, well, you need to spend now X amount on branding because that's going to take your brand to the next level, and they're like, well, how do we measure if it's actually working when we're used to just the performance of like 4.2 return?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, you know. It depends on I think depends on your plans ahead of you, you know. Like if you're actually trying to build like a, you know, household brand, or you're trying to build a brand that has a purpose and a meaning, you do need to sort of communicate that in some sense, you know. Like we've done a lot of work around these sort of sustainability agendas, and we tend to communicate that in our sort of more awareness-driven marketing, and that way we can get sort of an understanding, or the consumer to understand like the benefits of our proposition. Okay. But then in the performance play, I mean, there's other factors that play a difference. Yeah. It's like price. It's obviously these types of things do play a better sort of a return in terms of the conversion. But for a lot of small brands only have been built through like the Amazon channel, like talking about advertising and awareness. I mean, it doesn't exist. No. But I think if you do want to operate an omni-channel business, you do need to think about those type of things.
Yeah. So if you're small and you're kind of planning on staying small, then performance only can work. But if you actually want to take it to the next level, then you need to think about a broader approach.
Yeah, or if you only choose a single channel, which is Amazon, I think you can continue doing the Amazon like performance thing. But if you only focus on, and we see that with a lot of Swedish brands, for example, they've chosen the route of like a direct to consumer like path, and the way they do marketing is a lot of PR. So some of the Swedish brands have been very good at creating sort of global awareness around a ethos or a product that they have, and then sort of supporting that with additional advertising makes sense, you know. So you might that's been a very good sort of playbook for a lot of big or successful Swedish brands. It's started from nothing, and they aren't even on Amazon. Like they play a pure play, you know, Shopify direct to consumer play. Is it sustainable? I don't know. Maybe you want to bring them, depending on the product. Maybe you want to bring them on to the marketplaces as well, because you do capture a different type of audience and a different consumer. I mean, Amazon is half of the e-commerce in the US, for example. Slightly less in the UK and Germany. But like if you want to capture the full potential, you do need to think about all these channels and how these channels work together. And thereby, like pricing, you know, is important. So if you can't price your products cheaper in your own channel versus the Amazon channel, like that's going to hurt you as well. Yeah,
it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, because there's been this explosion in the number of brands, I feel like, and it's not clear how the best playbooks. I mean, obviously, you guys are very successful in doing what running your playbook, but I know there's quite a like tension and discussions among brands of like, how do we think about retail versus our own and pricing, like you said, and it's quite complicated.
But I think the lack of like channel strategies. Let's take some of the old 50-year-old brands. I mean, that have been very strong in the physical retail channels and so forth. Like they've created an opportunity for these new modern e-commerce brands to capture the Amazon market channel as well as some of the direct to consumer channels, because they made the choice of not going there. Like I've spoken to a lot of brands that are like good brands, and they've made the decision that, well, we're only going to sell through retailers. And then you become a dusty business by doing so. And as a result, there's going to be other players that capture your market in those channels. And Amazon particularly is a challenging channel if you try to basically rely on other people to sell your product through that channel. It's a tough sort of play to win.
And so for these more established brands, it's maybe this kind of idea that we have such a strong brand that we're gonna build our own, and consumers are gonna come to us. And the reality is that people buy from the channels that they're used to buying, and if your brand isn't there, they're going to buy.
Well, I mean, there's a reason why there's more than 10 million Amazon sellers that have all created their own businesses from, private label brands. So they've just copycatted what somebody else has done in another retail channel, and then created, and these businesses basically allow that to happen on their watch, these more traditional brands. So I do agree that it's sort of now it's sort of cat and mouse type of play. I mean, these more traditional brands, I think, are now trying to sort of build their position in these global marketplaces, and they're running behind.
Yeah. Rob and I could continue this conversation for a long time, but we would have to do that in another episode. Before we end, if there's a brand doing 2 to 5 million, maybe in that range, then they should an online brand who wants to kind of take it to the next level, then they should contact you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're focused on certain categories, so we're obviously not the solution for everybody, but for sure, like if you want to be part of taking sort of a brand out to the world, then definitely we've tried to build a playbook to take some of these Nordic brands with inherent demand and bring them over to the US and win in these global markets. Yeah,
and I think you've made a good case that doing that requires a lot of different skill sets. And so it's either like you have to build that team on your own, or you can connect to like someone who, like eBrands, who has that team and playbook and get there much faster, presumably.
Yeah, and I mean, the entrepreneurs can play a part of that journey moving forward as well. So it's not like we want to throw them out. Like this is a way of amplifying basically the team you have. Yeah.
It's super exciting, and I'm excited to see how this year plays out, and wish you guys the best of luck. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast, and hopefully we can continue in a future episode.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.